Have a look at this video.
If these are locals, why are they getting a police car? What time's the next bus? You wait 15 minutes for a bus and then 3 come all along at once. Look, they're all cramming in.
You exchange the Bible for a bear, and today the preachers of God's word are being arrested for alleged hate crime.
He's taking on camera!
Good. I'm going to put your handcuffs on.
Harrison!
The report is the one you have a knife. Do you understand?
Oh, see, look, why?
Okay, we'll be very gentle with you.
Warning
Okay.
police.
You just need to put your hands like that.
You ran away when police approached. Okay, that's not leaving, that is assembling and then running away.
Okay, so the arrest is for breaching that condition, okay?
And what was the condition?
Condition is not to be in this area under section 14.
But there's so many people in this area, so why have you arrested her?
Given ample.
Shank off, fam! Do your thing, close, shank off!
The nation is on edge, and the truth can no longer be ignored. In a shocking twist that has rocked Westminster and sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has crossed a line that no democratic leader should ever dare to cross. Farmers, voters, and even ordinary citizens have been dragged away in handcuffs, not for committing crimes, not for inciting violence, but for so-called non-compliance. The crackdown has begun, and the images flooding social media tell a chilling story. Peaceful men and women, some with children at their side, being arrested for daring to raise their voices against the government. And now, King Charles himself has erupted in fury behind palace walls, warning that this is no longer politics, it is a betrayal of the people. Britain is not just divided, it is on the brink of something darker, something that threatens the very foundation of its democracy. The spark that ignited this firestorm did not come from London, but from the fields and villages of rural Britain. For generations, farmers have been the backbone of the nation, working the land, feeding the people, and preserving the traditions of community and hard work. Yet today, they find themselves branded as enemies of the state. It began with Labour's controversial inheritance tax targeting farmland, a policy that many saw as a direct attack on families who have struggled to keep their land for centuries. As grieving sons and daughters inherited farms, they were suddenly hit with astronomical tax bills, forcing them to sell off ancestral land just to survive. The outrage spread quickly. What started as quiet frustration in Kent and Norfolk turned into fiery resistance across Yorkshire, Lincolnshire and beyond. Tractors lined up on motorways, rural communities held vigils, and makeshift protest camps sprang up at field edges, sending a clear message to Westminster. This was not just about money, this was about survival. But instead of hearing the cries of ordinary people, Starmer's government answered with force. Riot police were deployed to dismantle the peaceful gatherings, storming camps with shields, batons and tear gas. Videos circulated online of farmers in mud-stained boots being thrown into vans, while their children screamed in horror. Elderly men and women who refused to leave their homes were dragged out in the dead of night. One widely shared clip showed a disabled veteran being pinned to the ground for holding a sign that read, "We feed you, why do you betray us?" These images struck the nation's conscience like lightning, and the backlash was immediate. Yet Labour did not retreat. Instead, they expanded their crackdown, labelling dissent as non-compliance and authorising arrests at town hall meetings, community gatherings and even private discussions where criticism of government policy was voiced. The use of the term non-compliance is what has sent the greatest chill across Britain. No longer are people being arrested for breaking laws or disturbing the peace. They are being detained for refusing to submit without question, for daring to challenge authority, for speaking words that do not align with the government's narrative. Ordinary voters who ask tough questions about rising energy bills, collapsing public services or tax burdens have found themselves silenced, removed and in some cases imprisoned. In Essex, a mother was arrested after refusing to sit down when a Labour MP ignored her plea about heating costs. In Cornwall, students were handcuffed after chanting freedom at a council meeting. Across the nation, the message has become terrifyingly clear. Silence is safety. Dissent is crime. It was only a matter of time before the monarchy was pulled into this storm. Sources from Buckingham Palace reveal that King Charles was briefed on the escalating chaos with disturbing video evidence from the countryside. Insiders claim the king was left stunned and shaken after watching footage of police manhandling pensioners and veterans who had done nothing more than raise their voices. One report describes the king slamming his fist on the table in anger, declaring, "This is not governance, this is tyranny dressed in law." For a monarch known for his measured words, this rare outburst sent shockwaves through the palace. Royal aides whisper that Charles made an urgent, heated call to the Prime Minister, warning him that the nation's trust was being shattered beyond repair. He's said to have warned Starmer directly, "You are playing with the stability of this kingdom. The people's loyalty is not infinite." Yet even as the King's frustration leaks into the public domain, the government remains defiant. Labour spokespeople dismiss the palace's concerns as exaggerated, framing the arrest as necessary to maintain order and unity. But the cracks are widening, protesters are not backing down, farmers are refusing to abandon their fields. Towns across Britain are erupting in anger, with chants of "We will not comply" echoing in streets from London to Manchester. What began as a struggle over taxes and farmland has transformed into a full-scale rebellion against authoritarian overreach. And with King Charles himself now at the centre of the storm, the question is no longer whether this government can survive, it is whether Britain itself can endure the pressure without tearing apart. The crisis deepened when Starmer's government expanded its definition of non-compliance far beyond the farmers who had first stood up against unfair taxes. It was no longer just about rural Britain. It became a weapon used to silence anyone, anywhere who dared to question authority. The clampdown spread into towns and cities, transforming local council meetings into battlegrounds between frustrated citizens and state enforcers. In Birmingham, a father of two was detained after asking his MP how his family could survive another winter of soaring energy bills. In Manchester, security dragged away an elderly woman mid-sentence as she demanded answers about hospital closures. The government labelled these actions as disruptions, but ordinary people saw them for what they were, an assault on democracy itself. The right to speak, the right to challenge, the right to question, these were now treated as crimes in Starmer's Britain. Reports poured in from across the country of citizens being arrested in their own communities for daring to resist silence. In Yorkshire, a group of teenagers were taken away after staging a small sit-in at their school in solidarity with the farmers. In Essex, police seized livestock from a family farm under claims of tax non-compliance, leaving an entire community in shock. Even small acts of defiance, holding banners, posting videos, organising neighbourhood meetings, were met with overwhelming force. Families watched in disbelief as their neighbours, friends and colleagues were labelled as agitators, simply for refusing to bow down to Labour's tightening grip. What once felt like the distant threat of authoritarianism had now arrived at their doorsteps. But the turning point came when the scale of the arrests could no longer be hidden. Independent journalists, despite facing mounting censorship and intimidation, began exposing the shocking figures. Over 700 people detained in less than a month, farmers, voters, students, pensioners, swept into hastily erected detention centres. Warehouses, military barracks and disused industrial sites were repurposed into makeshift holding facilities, cut off from legal aid and media scrutiny. Families were left in despair, with loved ones vanishing into a system that offered no transparency and no accountability. Lawyers warned of the collapse of habeas corpus, a principle that has safeguarded British liberty for centuries. Yet the government pressed on, justifying the arrest as part of emergency stability measures necessary to protect unity. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. While the monarchy traditionally remains neutral, insiders claim King Charles felt cornered by the unfolding crisis. For a man whose public image has been shaped by his commitment to tradition, unity and moral duty, the scenes of brutality and repression gnawed at him. He had reportedly told close advisers that silence in the face of tyranny was complicity and that history would judge him not by ceremony, but by courage. Royal aides say he is weighing the possibility of an extraordinary public intervention, something not seen since the abdication crisis nearly a century ago. The King's frustration with Starmer has now become an open secret, with whispers of late-night calls, tense exchanges and heated warnings. For a monarch who has always sought balance, he now finds himself at a crossroads where neutrality may no longer be an option. Meanwhile, the public mood hardened. Protests that began in rural fields have spilled into major cities, growing larger and more determined with each arrest. In London, thousands gathered outside Parliament chanting, "We will not comply," their voices echoing through the capital despite heavy police presence. In Manchester, community halls overflowed with residents demanding answers from local representatives who could offer none. In Scotland, defiance took on a new edge as leaders openly questioned the legitimacy of Starmer's decrees, hinting at open resistance to Westminster's authority. Across the UK, from Cornwall to Aberdeen, ordinary Britons who had never before joined a protest were taking to the streets, driven by a shared sense of betrayal and urgency. The international community began to take notice. Human rights groups issued statements condemning the arrests, while European newspapers published editorials warning that Britain was slipping into authoritarianism. The United Nations requested clarification on reports of mass detentions, while allies in North America expressed grave concern over civil liberties in the UK. Foreign diplomats, once hesitant to criticise London, privately voiced alarm that one of the world's oldest democracies was unravelling before their eyes. For ordinary Britons, this international spotlight offered a sliver of hope, but it also raised a disturbing truth. Their government's reputation abroad was collapsing, and the cracks at home were widening into fissures. Inside Westminster, however, Starmer showed no sign of retreat. He stood firm in press conferences, dismissing concerns as exaggerations, accusing protesters of being agitators, and insisting that unity required discipline. His carefully chosen words carried a darker undertone, one that many heard as a direct threat. Those who challenge will be crushed. In one speech, he claimed that those who destabilise unity from within are not patriots, but enemies of progress. For critics, this was no longer the language of leadership, but of authoritarian rule. For supporters, it revealed a prime minister willing to sacrifice freedom for control. The clash between government power and public defiance has become the defining struggle of this moment. Protesters continue to march, farmers refuse to abandon their land. Citizens speak out despite the risk of arrest. Each act of resistance adds fuel to a fire that grows hotter with every passing day. And with King Charles visibly torn between silence and intervention, the stakes have never been higher. Britain now stands at the edge of a dangerous precipice. If Starmer continues to tighten his grip, the collapse of trust in government will not just be political, it will be existential, threatening the very soul of the nation itself. The storm now engulfing Britain has become more than just a political crisis. It has morphed into a full-scale battle over the very meaning of freedom, democracy and national identity. Each day brings new reports of citizens detained for non-compliance, a term so vague and ominous that it has left the public in constant fear of crossing invisible lines. Families whisper at dinner tables about whether attending a local meeting could risk arrest. Teachers warn students to avoid discussing politics in class. Churches, once places of refuge and unity, now open their doors at night to host community meetings for those searching for legal help or safety from government overreach. The chilling atmosphere is unmistakable. Britain is not simply divided, it is living under the shadow of suspicion and fear. The government's control tightened further with the introduction of sweeping new legislation rushed through Parliament under emergency provisions. This included the so-called Community Protection Order, a law that allows authorities to arrest or fine anyone suspected of spreading destabilising narratives. In practice, this means that posting a critical video, sharing a meme, or even publicly questioning a policy can result in an immediate police response. Independent digital creators, bloggers, and small media outlets have been silenced overnight. Some have had their websites taken down, others their bank accounts frozen, and many more their families threatened with legal consequences. Even large technology companies, under pressure from Labour's directives, have begun flagging and removing content deemed non-compliant. The digital space, once the last frontier for free expression, has now been turned into a minefield of censorship. The judiciary, long considered the guardian of fairness and liberty, has also been swept into the government's orbit. Courts have repeatedly upheld mass arrests and detentions, citing national interest as justification. Legal experts warn this alignment between government and judiciary marks a dangerous erosion of checks and balances. Some former judges, breaking from their usual silence, have issued stark warnings in open letters, accusing the government of weaponising the court's dissent against its own people. One retired justice described the situation bluntly: the law is no longer a shield for the citizen, but a sword for the state. These words resonated deeply across the country, fueling a growing sense that the nation's legal foundation was being dismantled piece by piece. Meanwhile, resistance has only grown stronger. What began as isolated protests in rural areas has evolved into a nationwide movement of defence. Reform UK, once dismissed as a fringe political voice, has risen as a central force in the resistance. Its leaders have pledged non-violent opposition, but their rhetoric has struck a powerful chord with ordinary Britons who feel betrayed and abandoned. Local chapters of Reform UK are now organising peaceful marches, publishing detailed reports exposing Labour's policies, and providing legal aid to families of those detained. Membership numbers have surged to record highs, with tens of thousands of new supporters joining in just weeks. From small towns to major cities, the movement is gaining momentum and its rallies are drawing crowds not seen in decades. But this surge of defiance has only hardened Starmer's stance. In recent press conferences, he has accused Reform UK and its supporters of undermining national stability and acting against the interests of the British people. His words, carefully crafted to sound measured, carry the weight of authoritarian threat. Government posters have begun appearing in city centres, urging citizens to report anti-UK behaviour in their neighbourhoods, eerily reminiscent of regimes that history remembers for all the wrong reasons. The climate of fear is deepening, but so too is the determination of those who refuse to bow down. Every arrest, every silenced voice seems only to strengthen the resolve of the resistance. King Charles remains at the heart of the drama, his role both symbolic and fraught with peril. The king is constitutionally bound to remain politically neutral, yet millions of Britons now look to him as the last line of defence against unchecked power. Petitions calling on him to address the nation have gathered millions of signatures in record time. Scholars and commentators debate daily that whether he should break tradition and take a stand. Some warn that any public statement could provoke a constitutional crisis, while others insist that silence in the face of tyranny would tarnish the monarchy forever. For Charles, this is not merely a political test. It is the defining challenge of his reign. The choice he makes could alter the role of the monarchy for generations to come. As Britain descends deeper into unrest, the world is watching. International human rights organisations have accused the government of violating fundamental freedoms, while allied nations privately voice concern that Britain is on a dangerous path. The European Court of Human Rights has opened a formal inquiry, while in Washington, a bipartisan group of lawmakers has introduced a resolution condemning the UK's authoritarian measures. The once proud image of Britain as a beacon of democracy is crumbling on the global stage, replaced with headlines of repression, censorship, and mass arrests. This international scrutiny adds pressure, but it also isolates Starmer's government, which increasingly finds itself defending the indefensible. The people, however, have not lost hope. Across villages, towns and cities, a quiet but powerful defiance is spreading. Farmers continue to guard their land. Students organise underground meetings to share information. Communities gather in secret to discuss strategies of resistance. The spirit of liberty, though battered, refuses to die. Britons are beginning to recall their history of standing up against oppression, the Chartists, the suffragettes, the miners, the war generation who stood firm against tyranny. That history is now echoing in the chants, banners and determination of today's protesters. Each act of defiance, no matter how small, has become part of a growing chorus demanding freedom. The clash between Starmer's government and the people has reached a boiling point. On one side stands a prime minister tightening his grip, using fear and law to silence dissent. On the other stands a population increasingly unwilling to remain silent. driven by a deep sense of betrayal and injustice. And hovering above it all is King Charles, torn between duty to neutrality and the responsibility to safeguard the moral compass of the nation. Britain is no longer merely in turmoil, it is standing on the edge of a precipice, its future hanging in the balance. What comes next may not only define the fate of Starmer's government, but the destiny of the United Kingdom itself.